Gosh, I know we have a game against the Tennessee Titans this week, okay? And I would love to live kind of in the moment of the season, okay? We know damn well that's how the team has to approach this thing, but as fans, when we have the discussion, we know damn well that this team's playoff hopes were wiped right off the slate when we lost to the Denver Broncos. And even if they weren't, even if there's a world where technically we make the playoffs, for the sake of an expectation of success, you had to win that game, okay? So when we have our conversations over here, if we're going to have the meaningful conversations about the Indianapolis Colts, it's kind of hard to talk about the game. Not that we won't do a game review, but it's kind of hard to talk about the game and the stuff that's in front of us and the season at play when ultimately it doesn't really matter in the end. What really matters is the landscape of where things are at with the Indianapolis Colts. And one of the conversations that has to be had, because it's something that can't be ignored when you look at the season, this offense has been incredibly disappointing as a whole. Now, of course, we've had stretches and all of those types of things, but throughout the course of the season, this was not what we expected. And there are so many moving parts in the discussion about the Colts offense, what's gone wrong, whose fault it is if we're going to play the blame game, all that type of stuff. Right off the bat, you have to ask yourself this. Did we expect too much out of this Colts offense? Because we know, as good as anyone as Colts fans, that disappointment is rooted in expectations. Whatever your disappointment level is when a scenario plays out has everything to do with how you expected that scenario to play out. So, I guess in the sake of pursuing truth, I'm asking, was the writing on the wall? When we looked at this season and we expected a good offensive performance, and this is an honest question, I'm not saying that to imply that it was. I'm just trying to pursue the truth about the team. Was the writing on the wall? Were we fair to expect better than what we had seen or have seen up to this point, given the context and given what we were looking at coming into the season? And I can't help but think about what some of you guys may have been here for a while. I go to training camp every year. Right now, I'm a guy that lives 800 miles away from the team. I'm not part of the community. I'm not a reporter. I don't have a journalism degree. Okay, I'm not writing articles on some website or anything like that. So the only thing that I have that gives me any sort of edge to give you an inside scoop is to travel to Indy once a year, go to training camp, and give you my takeaways. And this year, one of my biggest takeaways was that the defense was beating the offense pretty thoroughly in the practices that I watched. And I remember at the time I made a video, something along the lines, I forget the title, was like, the Colts defense is winning against their offense in training camp. Why are we ignoring it? And my takeaway in the video was actually that the Colts defense was perhaps a little bit better than we thought it was. And I was going through naming the players, this, that, the next, praising this guy, that guy. Well, as the season has played out, it seems that my lion eyes were telling me that the defense was going to play at a high level, when in actuality, perhaps what I was looking at was an offense that wasn't ready to deliver on the expectations that we had for it. Listen, I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong, right? Some of you guys think that I'm not that type of guy. I'm absolutely admitting when I'm wrong. Now, the question in that, okay, the Colts, we could conclude, have not lived up to the expectations. The question in that is, if we're to play the blame game, you have really two main characters in that story, okay? You have Shane Steichen and you have Anthony Richardson. And my goal isn't to pit them against one another or say it's all one guy's fault or all another guy's fault, but I also can't ignore the reality that in these types of things, it's not a 50-50 split, okay? What came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, one of them had to, okay? So one of these guys technically is more culpable than the next. The question is, who? Okay? Is it Shane Steichen? Is it Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman Jr., the offensive line that plays at a damn good level? Josh Downs, et cetera, et cetera? Is it all of that that is the problem with the offense? Or is it the incredibly inexperienced quarterback that we have playing, completing under 50% of his passes and really just not getting it done in terms of being consistent? Not to say he doesn't bring any upside to the team. I love Anthony Richardson, okay? I don't say anything to disrespect him. I don't say he's trash, okay? I'm just trying to sit here and tell the truth. And what do I mean by the truth, okay? I'm not saying that what I say 100% of the time is accurate. But when I say the truth, I'm saying Whatever I believe to be the case, whatever my eyes are telling me, okay, I'm going to tell you that. I'm not going to tell you something else to have the popular opinion. I'm just going to tell you what I see. And what I see is a quarterback that is holding back this offense overall. I say that it's primarily on him and not Shane Steichen, because when you look at Shane Steichen's body of work up to this point, okay, when you look to, and by the way, when I sit here and say that about Anthony Richardson, I'm not trying to bring the young man down. And when I say the young man, I'm older than him, okay? And if I met him in person and he's 6'5", 2'5", I'd look up to him like an uncle, okay? So not get it twisted here, okay? But if you were to ask Anthony Richardson in confidence, do you think you need to complete more passes for this offense to be successful? He would say yes, okay? So I'm not saying anything that's out of bounds here. Just want to make sure that that's on the table for everyone to chomp on, okay? But back to Shane Steichen. When you look at his body of work, you say before he was hired as the Colts head coach, you look at his resume, there was not a single person in all of Colts Nation, not a single Colts fan, that looked at Shane Steichen and said that wasn't a good hire. We were all ecstatic about that hire, primarily because everywhere he's been, the offense has performed. The young quarterback has gotten better. Whenever he's called the plays, it's gone well. That was all the way into Indianapolis. Then his first year in Indianapolis, he had Gardner Minshew Jr., who had no right being a starting quarterback in this league. Okay, as much as I thought that he could play, he's a gamer. He's nobody's franchise quarterback. Nobody would accuse him of that. Okay, and the team I thought overachieved, kind of given the circumstances that they had on the offensive side of the football going into last year. So now this year, when the offense isn't working out, the primary difference is Anthony Richardson. It just is, okay? And play calling isn't one of those things. Like, people are like, his play calling's regressed. What does that even mean? Like, a play calling, are you suggesting that somehow, if you continue to be the guy calling the plays on the sideline, that you can get worse at it? You could get worse at, like, I don't know how that's the type of thing that you would regress at. To me, it doesn't make any sense. Like, when a player regresses, it's because of one of two things. Because they lost their, into play in the league, the physicality in this league, you got to have a level of confidence. You have to have a level of moxie. So either that part of your psyche has been compromised, or physically, your body is no longer built to be in the league due to injury, due to age, et cetera, et cetera. But a play caller, how could you possibly get worse at that? To me, that doesn't really make one bit of sense. So when people say, hey, Shane Steichen is a problem for this offense, all I'm saying is I'm judging his body of work. Like, the same way you might judge Chris Ballard, and you might kind of look at like the little like positives in there and say, yeah, but look at his overall body of work, and that guides your opinion, which I think is fair enough. I'm looking at Shane Steichen and saying, hey, before this season, when has there ever been a question about this guy's prowess as an offensive mind? Now, of course, his resume as a head coach is a little bit different than his resume as a coordinator or a play caller. But all I would say is I thought last year you could look at as a success, given the circumstances that Shane Steichen inherited. Because make no mistake, Shane Steichen was given a hard job becoming the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, okay? That's just the fact of the matter. That's not an excuse for the team to underperform, but at the same time, you look at the Colts, and what are all the things we have spoken about as a fan base? Now, we can disagree as to the degree in which this is the case, but there's no question that when you look at where the Colts were versus where they are now, the culture has been deteriorating to some degree. On top of that, you drafted a project quarterback, the likes of which only on one hand can you count the amount of times a guy like Anthony Richardson has gone in the top 5. And I'm being generous saying 5. I mean, a guy who was barely able to complete 50% of his passes in college had all the talent in the world. But you want to talk about a boom, bust pick where the floor is pretty low? Anthony Richardson was that type of pick, okay? So between the deteriorating culture and that quarterback, that's a tough draw for Shane Steichen. Now, also, I understand Shane Steichen had to have played a part, right? At minimum, in drafting Anthony Richardson. I guess my question is, if you ask Shane Steichen, who did he think was better? CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, like, how did he have the quarterbacks ranked? That would give us the truth, right? But at the same time, he's the head coach. They draft the quarterback. He has to hold a level of culpability in that. But was it really 50-50 on the decision? Now, listen, it might have been 70 Steichen, 30 Ballard, but it might have been 30 Steichen, 70 Ballard, right? Like, imagine you and someone else were making the decision on who to draft. Like, have you ever tried to run a fantasy football team with a friend? Have you ever tried to do that before? Well, if you have, you know how difficult draft day is. And at the end of the day, even if both of you agreed on a decision, okay, one of you guys definitely is the one who kind of made the decision on some level. Just because the other guy signed off on it doesn't mean maybe it was his best idea. There was a level of compromise being had. Now, we don't know which one of them was on kind of the side of that maybe had to make a compromise, but presumably, unless they were both lockstep on Anthony Richardson, one of them had to, okay? So that may have been Shane Steichen. I don't know. All I'm saying is right now, you look at the Colts offense and you say, for me, again, if you want to count this year and hold that against Shane Steichen to the degree that you completely ignore his resume in the NFL up to that point, then I can't bring you another way. But if you look at it and say, not for anything, you look at Shane Steichen's career and what has followed it and the success that he's had, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, as that's what his resume is all about. When you look at that and then you bring this season in, the one variable that's different is Anthony Richardson. Now, the question is, what do you draw from that? My goal is not to say that Anthony Richardson needs to be replaced as the quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts, but there is a question at play because you take into account just the play. And now you can't plan for injuries, but the reality is that Anthony Richardson hasn't been overly great at staying healthy, if that's a skill. The question becomes this, not to the degree of drafting a quarterback in the first round or something like that, but does there need to be some sort of pivot plan here for the Colts to sort of hedge the bet, right? High risk, right? Like generally, if you're, for example, playing in the stock market and you put a lot of money on one thing, the wise move would be to hedge in case your bet doesn't pan out. So you're not left with your pants down. Do the Colts have to make a hedge on Anthony Richardson? Something that isn't a Joe Flacco. I'm talking about like a younger guy. Do you remember when they were called the Redskins at the time? They're now called the Commanders, for those of you, I guess, who weren't a football fan at that time. They were once the Washington football team. One of the great names in the history of the sport, by the way, is the Washington football team. I like the Indianapolis Colts, but if they were not named the Colts, the Indianapolis football team, I mean, you're telling me that's not good stuff? You're telling me that's not good? Okay, regardless. Completely besides the point. They drafted a guy by the name of Robert Griffin III. Same year our team drafted Andrew Luck, for those of you who want a little history lesson. That same year, in the third round, they drafted a quarterback by the name of Kirk Cousins to be the backup for Robert Griffin III. And while Robert Griffin III was absolutely lighting up the league in his rookie year, ultimately, when it fell apart, they were able to fall back onto Kirk Cousins, okay? And for as poorly as that organization has been run historically, really until recently, I mean, that was a good move. Now, sure, neither Kirk Cousins or RG3 ended up being their franchise quarterback for good, but ultimately, it was better to have Kirk Cousins there than to have not had Kirk Cousins there. Am I right? So I do look at the Colts and say it's not to give up on Anthony Richardson, but would it be wise to hedge? Is that a direction this offense can go? Is there a move that is realistic at all that we could expect? Well, I actually have one in mind, and I think I'll share it at some point. I'm not going to share it now because it doesn't warrant a whole topic, and it really wasn't the point of today's episode, but I'll put that there as a little cliffhanger. Maybe you guys want to hear that. Maybe you don't. You'll probably hear it eventually, but I will be disappointed when that move doesn't happen. But regardless, that was just a little bit of discussion on the Colts offense, just kind of how we think through what the problem is there. There's also the reality that that Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman Jr. season's still pending, of course, I guess. I mean, you want to talk about two pieces in this offense that one we're heavily invested in and two have not at all lived up to the contracts that we gave them? Those are two guys right there. Now, what we attribute that to, maybe a discussion for another day. Maybe you attribute that to Shane Steichen. I would like to hear your case for that as opposed to just offense play bad. Shane Steichen called plays. Shane Steichen fired. Like, I would like to hear a better case than that, okay? But I'd be open to it if you were to give a good, well-thought-out one. But that's pretty much it. That's offensive discussion right there. My name is Justin. This right here was the Ride the Bench Colts podcast. If you made it this far, like, subscribe. Audio listeners, leave a 5-star review. And as always, go Colts.